To hit net zero by 2050, will need substantial amounts of additional renewable energy. A matter of money? Not quite. But because domestic financial resources are limited, foreign direct FDI unlocks funds for renewable energy projects like solar and wind energy. Attract more FDI. Domestic policy choices have an important role to play. Developing them further could triple the ratio of green investment to GDP. These % of what's needed from private investors. And of a low risk, high reward return on their investment. Countries can lower risk and create ongoing revenue streams. Investing in complementary public infrastructure, such as electricity grids, is also make a difference. Countries can support investment by fostering more open and improving the quality of financial institutions. For instance, sub-Saharan Africa. But so far, turbines and panels have only just started to gain traction. What and other structural constraints deter development of what would otherwise be a win electricity and help meet energy needs, all while driving economic growth and creating a return on dollars every year into Africa's renewable sector could transform energy access by 18% and increase GDP growth by 0.8 percentage points each year, pledged at least $100 billion annually under the Copenhagen Accord to support at COP29. But that international cooperation will remain critical. Policies can drive the external sector, and business regulations can boost climate finance and electricity. Ambitious reforms could increase climate finance by 20%, 7% over 5 years. Emerging and developing are benefiting from increased foreign investment and a booming renewable energy sector. Are also rising, helped along by national strategies and international partnerships. Strategic policies and international cooperation.
Great to see so many of you here today. My name is at the Financial Times, and I'm very pleased to be here to discuss one of the central questions that, namely, how does the world manage to get delivered to emerging market and developing to achieve a green energy transition? I'm extremely pleased. We have Kristalina Georgieva, who is the Managing Director of We have Ajay Banga, who is the President of the World Bank. Nadia Calvino, who is the President of the European Investment. And Mohammed Jamil Al-Ramahi, who is the Chief Executive of Masdar, which is the UAE's So welcome, everybody. Let's go straight to talking about here in Baku, namely the US election result. Let me ask each of you, what to make to your work on the climate? Kristalina.
We look forward to be working with the new US administration. We have everybody in office, and actually an administration ago, they have a mandate from the American people. Point. When I look at the US, private sector has the largest number of green patents in the world. To stay ahead of the curve, and I have no doubt that.
Great. Ajay.
So as I said in a panel a little earlier today, historic margin. So you have to start with that and respect for what that represents. The reality is faster, make ourselves more efficient, work better with the other MDBs, and get involved with the jobs. In general, as I've said for the last 2 months, that should. He's going to have opinions. We're going to talk to him. That's our job. In the 17 months, I've a change of government in Germany, a change of government in France, a change of government in the UK. It's life. We have to deal with it and work the right way.
Well, you will become president of the World Bank when there's an historic mega. Nadia.
Well, I think that beyond politics and debates and noise, climate change is becoming increasingly unaffordable. And the examples are clear, but also in the US, you know, very often. And at the same time, there is an energy revolution. Climate action is becoming more and more a good business. So I think the private sector is getting on with it, and citizens are change and asking their leaders to tackle it effectively. And that is the we can spend time just discussing issues, but I think it's better to get on with it and to mobilize green finance, public and private.
Yeah. Mohammed, Mazda's got a lot of investments in the US. This question's got an interesting one.
You know, the US for us is a key market, has been a key market. Experienced several administrations, as you can imagine, already. And we will continue growing our foot. In fact, a lot of the red states in the US, you know, they deploy a lot of renewables energy. So we don't really see any impact, honestly, within the US.
Plans to expand in the US, and you don't think that that's going to be affected, essentially, that's what you're saying.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This question of finding more climate finance for developing economies. So we've been talking about this at COP after COP. In fact, I didn't go to the 1995 COP, the first one, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was probably very much focusing on exactly this question. Particularly in recent big focus on how much private finance can be mobilized. It really hoping for and have been calling for. In fact, there's a really interesting book that's just come out by a former world private contributions to developing country in 2012, with only about 10% going to lower income nations, and the number's fallen since. What do you think is really the key to boosting the role of the private sector when it comes to funding the
Important thing is good policies. The research we have been that if you have good policies, you attract. In fact, when you look at the countries that are Chile, Uruguay, Vietnam, how do predictable regulatory environment long term? power agreements that say you're investing in renewables. I'm sure you would agree with that. You invest, and this is what we excel at the fund, to work with that would make them more attractive for private investment. But it is not, it would be unfair. We also need the international financial institutions step forward. I have been working for as long as I remember, and what there is a dramatic improvement in the way we work together. Cooperation. Why is this happening? Of what needs to be done. What we all recognize is that slower than it has to be, and most of it developing economies, whereas risks than we thought it would be. So imagine where we are. We have to mitigate time with the same sense of urgency. This is what is much more aware of our collective responsibility, and we have the way we work has changed. I'll give you one, just one. We have at the fund, we have a long, it's called Resilience and Sustainability Trust. We have 48 billion, and these programs, when we do it together with Ajay, when we create a massive transformative investment. This is
Okay. All right, that's going to be a tough one to follow, Ajay. So I'm going to. Well, what I wanted to ask you, Ajay, was about this private sector investment now, and that was basically being co-chaired by Mark Carney, UN Special. It was basically specifically going to look at what sorts of improvements and reforms could be made to try to boost private. With this series of recommendations, including greater use of World Bank guarantees. You can briefly just tell us, what's the bank doing to implement those recommendations, and what impact ultimately do you think they might have?
Ever since I came here 17 months ago, you've heard me talk about the importance of getting the private sector into this, because systems of governments or in our balance sheets to make this transition private sector in. The reality in the case of that private sector lab is that it was aimed at very focused on that. So we would end up trying to create a limited space we could work on. And cheaper than fossil fuel, then why is it that there aren't billions of dollars waiting, beating the door down to go in? And it turns out there were 5 recommendations. The first one goes back to what Kristalina was saying. It's the almost every investor needs to know that they can look forward to with clarity climate, land acquisition, tariff policy, laws and court laws and so on. We're doing it in different ways. A tangible example is the 300 million people we're trying 2030. 15 countries right now, heads of state, are prepared at the end of Jan in Tanzania to private investors and other MDs here, so we can talk about what is it that they're going to commit to do to make it more attractive. The second piece is guarantees. So we pulled all our guarantee platforms together across, are simplifying the product and pricing, simplifying the due diligence so that people can amount of guarantees we're doing. The first quarter was 3 times last year's, and we've only just begun the simplification. Our guarantee platform so that even if you get regulatory policy clarity, you may still have political. The third thing we're trying to do is to put ourselves as the first risk taker, meaning can you take junior equity? So if I'm a private investor and you take junior equity, you might of convincing me that this is a good investment because it's creating something called the Frontier Opportunities Fund, which is funded partly from the IFC's own retained earnings. We can, and use that as the way to absorb the ups and downs of taking a first loss within the next 60 days to launch. It's going through our board right now. Solar energy plant, it's got a 30-year payback, and you can't hedge the Indonesian for 30 years, or even the pound sterling. Certainly not other currencies. Exposure, and there are 2 or 3 ways. One of those is to do swaps with commercial banks have. So if we take India, India has 8,800 branches in the state of surplus deposits every day, which they park with the central bank at a few basis points of return. Work for an investor, effectively I take away the FX risk from the investor and bring can do. IFC is already at about 35% of its originations coming in. There are other ideas like a multi-layer risk, and not enough time for that, but there's stuff to do. This is actually the one with the most potential, but probably the longest time taken to get it going. And that is into an asset class. So if you could take loans on, I went to BlackRock and said to Larry Fink, hey Larry, wouldn't you like exposure to drinking water in Africa? He would say yes. Million. He has to underwrite each of them. They have different covenants, different structures. It's not them into a wrapper, create a rating agency wrapper around them, and then you can start creating a market. Doug Peterson, who's just stepped down from Standard & Poor's to run this for us. Institutions like BlackRock and a bunch of commercial banks, HSBC, Deutsche, are going to work on this idea to see if the MDBs, not loans, with standardized covenants and the right kind of wrapper for a rating agency wrapper. This to me is the years.
Okay. I mean, that is quite
This is what I'm trying to say to you is the idea that the private sector should enter in. They've got places to invest their money. You have to make that money predictable as a return and a good. This is not going to be a magic wand. It's hard work. It's blocking and with the right kind of patience.
Yeah. So that's really to that, and obviously you're already very familiar with it. What's going through your mind? Are you at the EIB on to?
Well, this is a joint process that we're working. The multilateral development banks working. I would add to AJ's 5 points. I would add 3 more things that. Investing in those public infrastructures that are absolutely indispensable for the private sector to interconnectors, without which it cannot have the balancing of the investments that may be put into renewable. Secondly, we're being innovative and creative in terms of financial instruments. to buy green bonds, to debt for climate swap with the Inter-American Development Bank and Barbados. We're bringing in the private sector in those programs. And so we risking and trying to mobilize private finance. But the third area, and actually, Ajay, you are the GEMS project, which is what we're doing is we're investment community, 40 years worth of detail around the world and the experience of multilateral development institutions. We have put it all together, and it leads to two very interesting conclusions. Of default is lower, and the probability of recovery from less developed economies. So actually, investors can countries better maybe than one would have thought. And secondly, that diversification throughout important message to investors. So we are also, I think, leading the way, showing come afterwards, and then we can also provide very valuable data, which we just disclosed, the benefit of international investors.
Yeah, and because that is something that investors have been asking for some time, and that is your perspective. Masdar is doing a lot of work in and making a lot of investments in emerging. Your perspective, what do you think are the main barriers to private sector investment there now when it comes to green?
To be sitting here as an investor, and I thank all of you for supporting investors like us to where it should go. So obviously, looking at we've developed projects in 40 countries. We are active in 23 or developing countries. We started our journey in an emerging. Here in Baku, 2 days from now, we will be doing the financial around 700 megawatts. Last year, we inaugurated the largest. What happened? We started the journey in Azerbaijan in 2019. Of EBRD, the IFC, working closely with the government. Policy, they have never had an independent power producer. Here, most of the power generators are state-owned. They don't have. This PPA is not bankable. So it literally took us government. But the reality is change. Leadership is important. Without a leadership, there is no business. In Uzbekistan. Today, Uzbekistan in Central Asia countries that is deploying renewable energy. In Uzbekistan, under construction or operation, 2 gigawatts of renewables. Before we started, it was a fossil grid. We have decarbonized the grid. With whom? To Uzbekistan, at Masdar, we started 20 years ago. Closed country. We left the country. We came back with the leadership, and they did not only make change, they worked with the IMF, they worked with the EBRD. The first project in Uzbekistan that we commissioned was done with IFC through the what we call megawatt. We started with 100 megawatt. But imagine a country They don't understand what is the need of a bankability. I go to the minister, I told him I need a power purchase agreement that is bankable. Tells me, okay, Muhammad, I PPA with you. But this PPA is not bankable. So how do successful journey in our industry to deregulation policy and leadership?
Yeah, which goes back to the point that you were making right at the start.
Yeah. Also.
But I just think, it really is a great point and great examples that you've just given there, because I think people often miss that. Look at another big issue here in Baku, and that is basically to channel climate finance from richer countries to poorer ones. That's going to replace 25. So multilateral development banks were obviously key. $1 a year goal. They were really very important when climate finance from the key multilateral development banks has more than tripled since. The bank and the EIB were today among the 10 MDBs that, right word to use, that you're going to be able to ramp up climate finance to low and middle $20 billion a year by 2030. $65 billion from the private sector. Now, a year figure, I think, is up from $75 billion in 2023. Billion was up from around 60 odd billion the year before. So, all going in the right direction. Just what besieged by us on the way to this panel was the 65 billion in is hoped to be mobilised. Is that an annual figure, or you as well? The question everybody's asking is, what does that mean for this new collective? Looks as though we're talking about potentially 185 billion. People are saying, well, does that mean that 200 billion, maybe even 3? The answer to which is I don't know, because, lifting here. But what do you think? Help me out here. How should we understand these climate finance goal that's going to be agreed, we hope, here in Baku?
On top of that, this is just what the MDBs have put forward. And I'm not going to spec 20 billion. And that's what we're saying. The 65 billion of private capital mobilization, all these things we're talking about, like the 5 things I talked about, actually come to fruition. He is working really hard to get to today. So I don't know what the bigger number will be, but this is what the MDB showing, that we're keen to make things happen.
Let me jump in here, because there's so at the place where the discussion is about numbers. So I full respect. About humongous numbers, which are really inapprehensible by citizens. People don't understand the people. I think we should get the motion going and think. Important, and we will make these efforts, and the European Investment Bank is one of the key players to ramp up our financial support. But it also is a system, and so we deliver more for every dollar that we project around the world. And it is also about setting in motion the necessary. And this was my point at the beginning, and I think you have very well illustrated what So there is a change which is already happening. Alina was saying we need to accelerate, we need to stay the course and accelerate if possible. Made, which we need to really pay tribute to and recognize, you know, cannot be difficult for a journalist, but I would really urge all of us to look at the full picture. And
I mean, we've got a lot of countries here are saying that that number we've seen from various reports over. I guess it's, you know, this is what we're seeing here. And Kristalina, you've spent so many years. Probably need to sort of try to confine the discussion to what multilateral. You see it.
First, I agree with Ajay. It is a matter of accountability. We hold us accountable. But I also see there is a concentration on how much, so there is predictability for emerging markets. We can count on funding that can flow their own economies. Nadia is correct that numbers around that we got accustomed to. So who makes a pledge? Hold them accountable. And then to sum up all the pledges and say, here we are coming with to make when we talk about these big numbers, to put to me is the size of the world economy. We have over GDP world economy. And when we say we need actually 2% of that size on it is big, but it is doable. And gear yourself that it can be in the ditch of, oh, it's so hard. Then that weakens. We can. So yeah, that's my contribution. Get in the job of happen.
So I would just say, the trillions aren't going to come to be from that private sector. Don't take the 65 billion that the multilateral banks are talking about as more. We cannot claim credit for every single private sector decision. There is going to be environment exists. So let me walk you through an example, which will explain the point. We said we're going to reach 300 2030 with the African Development Bank. Here's how it's going to happen. It takes between 10 and 15 billion from the governments of the countries. They don't have the SDRs. She and I are working together with them where she has a program to encourage them to create the fiscal headroom with her ability to provide the finance along with the project financing we do. In addition to that, we're going to need about 15 billion in these very countries. That's what that January end summit is about. So it's a mix of things. This is, when you take a number by itself and you look at this not just for the number, but also for the enablers that allow you to climb to the top of that prediction. The right circumstances and the right enablers for this to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a relatively new initiative that, what is it, Mission
300.
Mission 300, yeah. So I mean, quite an ambitious goal that you've got. I mean, I think it's...
You noticed.
Well...
it's half the number of people in Africa who don't have access to electricity today.
Right.
Giving claps for, not the stuff about some number that somebody produces.
Yeah, I mean, well, that we've got a bit of time left. Sorry, I thought we were getting close. Last made this really telling observation about Africa, which is basically that their capacity in Belgium, not a particularly sunny country, than there is in the whole continent. I guess, you know, to what extent is enormous gap is my question to you, Ajay, and then I want to come on to everybody else.
I'm not in the business of addressing a...
But I mean,
no, that's not correct.
I meant to the extent to which green energy projects are
elections. The work that's going on right now clearly establishes that a large part of the... Not only are we installing that, we've got experience in doing it in a number of countries. I've Nigeria and other places. We know how to do this. We can get that done, but every time we put one of those up, we're also going to put connecting them to power, which I think is quite useful. In addition, money is going to have and the utilities involved in these countries, because without that you can't make the part of the money in. That's why we said 30 billion from IDA, 10 or 15 from the countries. That'll work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that'll address the difference between Belgium and Africa.
No, well, I mean, that's why I wanted to ask you, Mohammed, actually, because last year, I think it was about $10 billion to unlock about 10 across Africa by 2030. And I was just wondering, you know, in the summit last year, but what sort of progress are you making towards that aim?
We are, through our platform called Infinity Power Holding, which, by the way, African Financial Corporation, we are the largest shareholder. We incubated 10 years ago. Today we are, I would say, the largest or the second largest. Be clear, you know, everybody talks about money. I always, because I've been developing renewable energy projects for 20 years. Is available when the opportunity is there. But let's also put power plants. We are building infrastructure projects. Sub-Saharan Africa. There is no grid in Sub-Saharan Africa, and some of these countries have no infrastructure, and you are absolutely right, sir. We need to invest in the infrastructure. All financed, C&I, solar home systems, because they are getting paid in local currency and they cannot fund. They have no access to power. We are trying to provide them solution. We thought it was, honestly, the only solution is to build the right infrastructure for the benefit. Deploy renewables at scale and distribute these electrons. It is extremely difficult. We've been in Africa for a long time, and we still, honestly, in some countries, we've been discussing, and this goes back to the leadership. FC, EBRD, Asian development, African development. One of our shareholders is the African Financial Corporation. They are willing to exist, and they are bankable. Correct? Comparing to any countries. For 4 years, we are trying just to figure out where is the environmental studies. We, Masdar, I don't need any development bank. We will fund the grid assessment if you like. And everybody to leave from the office to come and say, to show us what is like, to also appreciate the complexity. The money is available. I can tell you, we are there, and our partners are there.
Yeah. So it really about the need for regulatory certainty, about the need for climate policies, strong climate policies. You're happening, but I mean that's easy to say and not necessarily all that easy to do, right?
And yet, countries that are making really great progress. We are going to issue today a country that has put in place over many years. Remember, Côte d'Ivoire had a civil war. So it is possible, your point about we have seen in Africa a number of they have to be good on counts of institutions. Things would happen. So the question is, why not everywhere? At the African continent, there are two very big problems. One is conflict. In a place, investors would be very reluctant to come. And the second, corruption and bad management. And I think we need to call it the way it is. And then difference. We over the last years, we have had programs with of these countries. I am so joyful because I see, and I think that kind of gathering to just plainly say it. And here are examples of that, and then get countries to follow. I think it is. You have good policies, monies follow.
That's why those 15 countries are coming with their energy compact plans, which starts with the very important to do it systematically, building block by building block. Really important.
Okay, before we go, we will, I'm sure, be assembling at COP30 with some confidence that it's very high likelihood that all four of you will be in Brazil next year as well. What that you would hope to see that you're not seeing now, but you hope that we might see in a year's.
Closing the ambition. Be more ambitious, because if you are not to a place that I do not want to name, ambition gap.
So I'm very focused on hoping that between now and then we can solve in the sense of creating the right regulatory policy as a foundation for that voluntary make money move from the developing world to the developed world to the developing world in militarily. That market needs help with regulations, with negotiations that are going on here are going to be mission critical to getting that done.
About something completely different, so that I complement what they have. Breakthroughs. So what I would like to see next year is that we can talk about real success from the perspective of technological development, and that we can start out the challenges, but where are the opportunities? Community and humankind. I would like to have that positive story out there.
Okay.
interconnectivity, infrastructure, grids, and tripling renewable energy.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.